So we're going to look at more numbers and more coincidence between these World's Fairs of Chicago and Philadelphia, the connection between Kennedy and Lincoln and Custer, Custer's linking to RFK via the Pope Pius the 11th. Pope Pius XI was born in 1876. And like I say, we talked about that, I think, in the previous video. So let me just read. Lincoln was killed with a derringer. It's called a baby Philadelphia. There's more coincidence between, I thought it was coincidental because we're talking about the World's Fair in Philadelphia. The very first Ferris wheel, or Ezekiel's wheel in the sky, was at the World's Fair of 1893, rising to 264 feet. We mentioned earlier the symbolism of Ezekiel's wheel is moving from one world to the next, from the living to the dead. And remember the locksmiths and the keepers of the portal. Now look at this if you're a 666 hunter. 264 is the 666 triangular number, the very first Ferris wheel. Bringing them souls from one world to the next, glorifying the sacrifice of Custer outside that 1893 World's Fair. Make of it what you will, I just saw it there and reported it. When we look back, Custer, who some say wanted to be president, got himself into a pickle and his men seemed to allow it to happen. I'm talking about Reno and Benteen. Reno mainly, I think. Benteen saved a lot of people's lives except Custer's. Sure, Custer should have waited, but Custer wanted to get back to Libby. She wanted to get back to the Philadelphia World's Fair if all possible by July 4th. In 1893, they paid tribute to the 1876 sacrifice, or to the spirit of 76. Excuse me. One last time, let us look at this progression. Custer's legend began at Bull Run. 5,454 days, or 5,454 days later, Custer's last battle was at the Little Bighorn. So we have Bull Run, Sitting Bull. At the hands of Buffalo Bull Who Sits, or the Americanized version of the word, Sitting Bull, the spiritual advisor to the Lakota. Sitting Bull sacrificed his flesh and did a sun dance. We've already talked about. I say this is redundant. And I might go back over and redo this. I'm not sure if I get the gumption. So when the American soldiers died that Sunday, the men were being mutilated, and some Cheyenne women asked that they not mutilate the son of the morning star, which is what the Cheyenne called Custer. What did these women do to Custer? Custer wasn't mutilated, but the women took sewing awls and punched his eardrums out, so in the next life he will hear better. See, he didn't listen to them. He lied to them. He said he would never attack them. Just like your government lies to us today. Except for a lot more. God, the government's such a piece of shit. Circles opened the door between worlds for the goat, the young bull, and the ram that day. Now let's fast forward to Chicago in 1893. Buffalo Bill, notice the difference between Buffalo Bull and Buffalo Bill, ritualized the carnage at Custer's sacrifice as Ezekiel's will opened a portal between the living and the dead, starting on the summer solstice. Let's look at some fours, 76, Reno and Custer. Let's talk about the fours and the date that the news of Custer's defeat made it to Philadelphia World's Fair. It is no secret that Major Reno hated George Custer, and will assume the feeling was mutual. Before we go on, let me say, I'm only stating what research has shown me. I'm not saying secret societies have any involvement. I'm just looking at dates and only bringing up coincidences as I see them, mainly because of the dates. So let's continue. Major Marcus Reno, according to Wikipedia, on August 6th, this is 86, right? January. Yeah, because Yeah, because September's the 9th. But so that's 86. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. He was reassigned to in 18. Okay, so on 86 of 66. Both of these numbers are very important to Custer. He was reassigned to Fort Vancouver, as Assistant Inspector General of the Department of the Columbia. 1866 was also when Sitting Bull became principal chief, right? 1866 is when Custer got the 7th. 1866 was the circle around the circle tour that Jackson and Custer and Grant were all on together. 66. So, in December of 1868, which is a mirror at 86, he was promoted to major and served on court-martial duty at Fort Hays, Kansas. On July 21st, 1871, he joined the 7th Cavalry as commander at Spartanburg. So on June 21 of 1871, 5 years and 4 days prior to Custer's death, there's your 54 again, unless I did my math wrong. I do have some number dyslexia. In my mind, I see things backwards. So 76, 6 plus 1 is 5, so it's 5 years and 4 days. So there's your 54 again. He joined the 7th Cavalry as commander at Spartanburg, South Carolina. After several special assignments, he joined the Consolidated Regiment at Fort Abraham Lincoln in October of 1875. Is that 8 months before Custer would die? So notice the 86 or 86 and the 66. That magical 1866, all pointing to the massacre, and Custer's 86. Then in 1868, like I said, being a mirror of 86, Reno moved to Fort Hays, Kansas. Then 340 days before the battle that killed the goat, Reno moves to Fort Abraham Lincoln. So I guess I'm just summarizing there. Okay. So he was 340 days, less than a year, that he grew to have this hatred for the goat. Can you guess what lodge number and what month of the day Major Reno was accepted into the Freemasons? July 6th or 7/6 of 1867. There's your 1313 again. 67 being the mirror, or being the reverse or the mirror of 76. Washington Lodge number 4. Now keep in mind, he sat 4 miles from the massacre, thereabouts. 76 and 67 can both be reduced to 13 and again to 4 for another 4-4. When did the papers announce Custer's death at the World's Fair? 7/6 of 7/6. When did Libby Custer die? 4/4 of 33. Are you still with me? Let's look at Custer's Irish knight, Captain Keogh. He was in the Papal Guard, we know, but upon further research, Pope Pius IX was being attacked by Freemason soldiers. I was just watching something. 1876 was also a pivotal year for the church. I'll have to go back over that. So, having to do with the Freemasons in Italy. So the Freemason Marcus sat on a hill 4 miles from the sacrificial goat's death, or his sacrifice, and the 200 some odd men that were with him. He didn't have it easy. Thankfully, Benteen was there. Andrew Johnson, the president of 66, was also a Freemason, just in case you're wondering. Speaking of the zodiac, Scorpio was a water sign, and Major Marcus Reno was a Scorpio. Crossing the water was very difficult and played a role in the predicament that led to Custer and the 7th demise that day. Water has a gematria of 67, 22, 68, and 32 in those first 4 ciphers. I wonder if Custer had a chance to look in the mirror to see what I see. Custer, 86, 23, 76, 22. Water, like the water sign of Scorpio, is a reflection of Custer. 67 reflects the 76, the 32 reflects the 23, the 68, the 86, and of course, we have that ever-present 22. Where will you meet your 22? This is either very, very coincidental, or if I were suspicious, I'd almost wonder if Custer wasn't set up. The big difference between the magic that it appears to be laid out here is Sitting Bull's magic was never kept secret or occulted. Some hide their magic in rituals disguised as entertainment. Look at that girl that died a couple miles away from that. Oh, was it in 2013 or what else? When they had that girl from she was a Chinese Canadian girl citizen, and she got murdered in a water tank just outside of one of these big things that's going on, these big star things. So I think there's lots of sacrifices going on. So some hide their magic and rituals disguised as entertainment. Now, Custer didn't hear the natives. Here has an ordinal of 32. Reduction 23, reverse 76, and reverse reduction of 22. Again, here, 32, 23, 76. Read, 23, 32, 76, 22. Read, Audie Reed, Henry Reed, the young bull, George Custer's namesake, his nephew. Custer, 86, 23, 76, 40. One last thing about that Ferris or Ezekiel's will, when they were finished with it, it was dynamited. Well, that makes no sense as it was just steel beams and cables. It had to be dismantled anyway. Or maybe they just blew the base up. I don't know. I wasn't there. What date was it blown? May 11th, 1906. That's 30 years and one day after the opening of the 1876 World's Fair, like a bookend. How many months is 30 years? 360 months. How many degrees does a circle encompass? Remember, we're talking about these magic circles. Well, it's a 360 degrees. Is a measure of one full revolution. Well, technically, 30 years is 360.246 months. Well, let's look at that then. 386 is a circle. 246 is known as an untouchable number. The sum of its factors is 46. Sitting Bull had a gematria of 46 in the reduction cipher, the same as sacrifice, 46. Dynamite has a reverse reduction of 44, if you're wondering. As I said, this isn't about religion earlier, but maybe I'm wrong. I just don't know what religion would work in such a mysterious way in the ether realm as to pull such hideous strings as those that lead to wanton slaughter, as those committed in the name of progress. Yes, Sitting Bull did big magic, but he didn't occult it or hide it. And let's talk about that real quick. Now, he said, this battle is ours, but do not plunder and steal and mutilate the bodies, or take what he said, don't steal from him or whatever he did. But they did it anyways, and the rest is history spelled out by the victors. How about the other magic that seems to have taken place? Is it easy to find, or is it hidden in dates and numbers and names and the billions of pages of history? All spelled out and consumed by lemmings because it's easier, isn't it? So here I am on this journey looking for a possible sin offering. I have talked about Ezekiel's will, and I have talked about the sacrifice in 1876, where the scripture of Ezekiel 43:22 appears to play out with Custer, Henry Reed, and Captain Keogh. I've noticed a Lincoln connection to Custer as well as President Johnson connection to Custer. Don't forget that another Johnson was in the White House when RFK was assassinated. I have tried not to talk about it here, but the connection supposedly, or the coincidences between the JFK and Lincoln, but the Lincoln part turns out to be all through this. I see the coincidences between the name Pius that runs throughout, plus Custer and Lincoln. I've talked about Ezekiel's will being a portal between life and death, maybe some kind of time machine that was open for a while, or a connection between worlds, say, to maybe between the living and dead, or between the spirit world and ours. And I'm lucid and I'm aware of my surroundings and I know how crazy that sounds. I'm just speaking as a what if. Okay, so, bear with me here. Now, I wouldn't think that they would have dynamited the Ferris wheel. I know that sounds ridiculous, but let's look at 1896 in May, when H. Holmes was executed by hanging. We have talked about the connection between the Philadelphia World's Fair, the Chicago World's Fair, and the ritual sacrifice of Custer and the 7th Cavalry. Where was Abraham Lincoln inaugurated in 1861? Under the unfinished dome of the Capitol. That was designed by Thomas Eustace Walter. The same year George Custer was the GOAT. 1861, that is. It is hidden very well in the narrative, but a Freemason theme runs very deeply under this veil. They won't say whether Thomas Walter was a Freemason, or at least I didn't see it in the 10 minutes I searched for it. But he did build the Freemason Baptist Church at 400, there's that pesky 4 again, East Freemason Street. He also designed the dome, which President Lincoln was inaugurated in 4 years before his murder. Thomas Walter also designed the prison in which H. Holmes was executed. So he's connected to all three of these things. There's your Freemason theme if you want to follow that thread. That prison was on the corner of Reed and 10th Street. So Reed is the name of Audie Reed, Custer's nephew, who died in the sacrifice. And of course, that 10 being the 10 years between 66 and 76. And there are plenty of 10s, 10s, 4s, 14s, and 22s. Spelled doom. Okay. So Reed and 10th Streets in Philadelphia, home of the first World's Fair, 20 years before he died because he was executed in 1896 in the Freemason prison there, or designed by that guy. Reed, Custer's nephew, Audie, who died at the age of 18 in 1876 with George Armstrong, or Audie Custer. I mentioned the 4s that run through all of this. Libby Custer died on April 4th, or 4/4 of 1933, so we have a 4433 again. As an example, 10 and 4 is 14, and there are lots of 14s here as well. Walter Thomas was born in 1804. There's a 4 in Philadelphia. He was also the 4th architect in Washington, D.C. for 14 years, just like the 14 years that Sitting Bull survived after the Battle of 1876. Custer died 4 days after the summer solstice. The Wounded Knee Massacre happened 4 days after Christmas. Sitting Bull had fled to Canada for 4 years. Do you see it? This solidifies the argument of the 1876 World's Fair and the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago all being connected to the sacrifice of 76. If you look at your news and you look for these numbers, you will see how it is then coded and placed into the minds of everybody that watches or hears it. One last thing about the JFK, Johnson, and Custer Johnson similarities. So 2 Johnsons, right? So there's one. How old was Custer when he died? 36. Who was the 36th president of the U.S.? Johnson, after JFK was assassinated. Ezekiel's wheel and the portal to the other side? Well, there were 2 porters that day, with the 7th, Dr. Porter, who famously survived, and James Ezekiel Porter, there's your Ezekiel again, for the sacrifice, who was likely one of the earliest casualties, they say. What does porter mean according to Merriam-Webster? Porter definition and meaning. The meaning of porter is a person stationed at a door or a gate to assist those entering. A gatekeeper. Ezekiel's wheel, the portal to the other side. Native forces circling their foe, and Ezekiel Porter escorts the dead to the other side, and Dr. Porter escorts the living to this side. Even pulling some back, as he probably, likely, inevitably, I'm sure he did, save lives. How do we know? Because we already know that rain and water was a hindrance to the whole march. Custer struggled in the rivers. Reno the Scorpio, a fixed water sign. What about the porters? Both were born in February. Aquarius, The water bearer. Dr. Porter escorting the living, born February 13, 1848, 1 year, 11 days, or 111, after James Ezekiel Porter was born on February 2nd of 1847. There's your 22 and there's your 111. That that Kennedy curse is 111, just for the record. James Ezekiel Reed, like Custer, I say James Ezekiel Reed, James Ezekiel Porter, like Custer, went to West Point. That's a typo. So James Ezekiel Porter, like Custer, went to West Point. He graduated 16th out of a class of 39. Okay, 16 is the reverse of the 61 we've been seeing for the GOAT. 39 minus 16 is 23, which is the year Custer made it general. Custer's 23. Custer, the GOAT of West Point in 1861. What about Keogh? James Porter took command of Keogh's troop in 1874 when Keogh went home to visit Ireland. Now we're going to look at this 61, the year Custer graduated from West Point, and the number 22. Now Custer graduated as the GOAT, remember? 14 is Pan. Pan is the goat god. Okay. So we're going to go over. I want to try to get this done. Okay, so. We're going to have to go to part 4. So we're going to look at this year 61. Custer, we're going to mark this. God, I hate to start in the middle, but we're going to have to. And this is going to be part 4 here. And we're going to look at this 22 for Audie Reed. And we're going to look at Miles Keogh and Sydney Bull. And let's look at the deaths of these. Did I already do that? Da-da-da-da-da. I think da-da-da-da. Pretty much just summing up here, but I want to go over it because I'm pretty sure I'm talking about something here I didn't before, and that was the death of the indigenous leaders that day. So thank you. This is Wade. This is part 4, maybe? I don't know. Of my Lincoln or Custer sacrifice video. Thank you. Have a great day.